So I'm Lisa Peterson, and happy to be planning to come back to OSF. It's been a few years. I think the first play I did here was Othello in the Elizabethan, and then a few years later I did Henry IV Part 2, also in the Elizabethan. I've only ever been outside, and that's going to be true again with Hamlet. It's going to be outside in the Elizabethan. Well, I've always been curious about Hamlet's place in the culture. Meaning, I think it's if people are asked what's the best play ever written, I think a lot of people probably would think of Hamlet. And just the fact that there is a play in the world that has that kind of adoration around it, I've always found that to be pretty interesting. So when Bill called me and asked me if I'd like to take it on, I was filled with, both dread and excitement at finally getting into the world. I've seen it quite a lot, but I've never done it before. I'm still figuring out what my particular entry point is. I ran into Austin Pendleton in New York a couple days ago, and he had just done it at CSC with Peter Sarsgaard. And I said, as I'm asking everybody nowadays who has any history with Hamlet, what's the secret? And he said, more than any play he's ever directed, you have to have opinions about it. I think that's true anytime you direct, but I thought it was interesting that he said that. And he said you can change them, but you have to have them, because it can work in so many different directions. So when I take on a Shakespeare play, I do a thing that's kind of like, I don't know, the equivalent of like hanging upside down to shake the change out of your pockets. I'm waiting for myself to tell myself, what it is about the play that I think what path do I want to follow? And the things that have really so far surfaced, and this is still early days for me, have to do with the idea of Hamlet and his friends being sort of the smartest people in the room. These too smart for their own good kids who are still in college, really, and that are expected to inherit the running of this kingdom. Because we're not just talking about any old kids, we're talking about the son of the king, so that means someday he really should be king. And I think we meet them, one of the reasons the play's so great is we meet Hamlet he's in crisis from the moment the play starts until the very end. And there is not really any let-up. And the crisis is both deeply profound, which is that he's just lost his father, and it's also really complicated, which is that he thinks he knows who killed his father, he thinks his mother might have some connection, and he thinks he is responsible for righting this wrong. And he's not sure how. And that idea of a young person who is meant to take over the world, really, becoming disgusted with the way things have been going, and therefore not even, sort of deciding in some ways to radically abdicate, feels like a subject, like a sociological question that we can look at now, not only feeling for this young man in his personal situation, but also the whole idea of living in a world that you see as corrupt, and how one operates in that world where everything around you looks corrupt. That's what's interesting to me. So I've been, just in the last few days, thinking about this as a kind of generational war play, as so many Shakespeare plays really are, but about those who run the thing and those who should next run the thing, and this kind of this power struggle between them. So I think I'm starting to think about Hamlet and his friends, meaning Ophelia and Horatio and Rosencrantz and Guildenstern and Laertes, the next generation kids, and then the authority figures as these two camps. And often I think we think about Romeo and Juliet in that way sometimes, but maybe not necessarily Hamlet. But I am interested in the generational issues. Well, this is a play set in Denmark. So I like to think of this as a ghost story first. It really is a ghost story. It starts with a ghost. Ghost, puts the play in motion. Because if the ghost, if Hamlet weren't certain that his father was speaking to him from beyond the grave, he might be a gloomy Dane for the rest of his life, but I don't think the events of the play would happen. So and knowing that we're doing this outside, I'm thinking about the challenge of like a daytime ghost story. How do you do that when it's not dark yet? It's going to get dark, it's getting dark. That's always a really fun thing about being outside, is you can feel time passing. At that time, outside here, you can feel time passing, which is great for theater. So, but I'm thinking about this as a Scandinavian ghost story, sort of a light out at midnight kind of story, and wondering, I haven't solved this, but how to represent, how should the ghost appear? And is the ghost of Hamlet's father the only apparition? Is it the only, is this a world in general in which like doors fly open and you don't know why, inanimate objects move and you don't know why? That feels exciting to me. So I'm thinking, let's first think of this as a ghost story, and then also as a generational war within that. Well, I only recently remembered that, in fact, I've been to Elsinore. It wasn't the first thing that popped up in my mind when Bill called me, but in fact, many years ago, 25 years ago, I'm a Peterson, so I have Scandinavian roots. I went on a roots journey by myself to Denmark, Sweden, and Norway for about a month. And I remember going to Elsinore, which is on this little, it is an island. It's its own little island. It's surrounded by water, and you have to cross this little drawbridge type thing to get there. And I remember being surprised by the way it looked inside, meaning that it was not a Gothic castle. It's quite airy and open feeling, but also I had spent a rainy, sick night in a pup tent the night before, so I also was carrying my own little gloom around. But I remember putting away in the back of my mind, if you ever, Lisa, if you ever end up directing Hamlet, you have to try to remember what it was like to be here in Elsinore. And I think I will certainly be looking at images of Elsinore. And that's in part because it's in the Elizabethan, where you have this Tudor facade, so you always have to interact with it in some interesting way. But yeah, I'm happy to say I've been to Elsinore. And yeah, I was, this morning in auditions, we were talking a little bit about the idea of how do you work on a play that's considered by many to be the best play ever written? What is it that makes it so great? I mean, you have to ask yourself. I think that's your first job in approaching working on a play like Hamlet, is that you have to actually want to understand why it's so great, not just take it for granted that it is. And that's the challenge, is to a lot of these speeches, when they begin, I think many people have the sensation of familiarity. And so it feels to me like it's the job of the director of a great play and the actor playing that part, to always to find a path through a famous speech that makes it unfamiliar, though it is so familiar. So and in every way, I think you have to keep looking at the thing. What is it about this play that keeps it? Why does it matter to us still? What is it about the play that matters to us? I've worked with a lot of living playwrights, because that's mostly what I do, actually. Directing a Shakespeare play is like a holiday for me. Every once in a while, a really good playwright hits on something, and a play comes out of them. I remember working at Lincoln Center when John Guare brought in 6 Degrees of Separation. And that is a perfect play. It's his great play. And I know that it just, he wrote wonderful plays before it and wonderful plays after, but that particular play, he hit on a subject that mattered to people, and he knew how to tell it, and it came out fast. It didn't need a lot of rewriting. It just came out of him. So I guess I think of Hamlet, it must have been in Shakespeare's career one of those plays where he just, I suppose I don't really. There was this Hamlet, so it's not, as with many of Shakespeare's plays, he didn't necessarily even invent the circumstances of the play, but he was meant to tell that story. And I think it's the fact that it's one of the most dramatic plays ever written. It doesn't let up, and it starts in extremis so clearly, and you've got a central character that is complicated, but always having to make decisions. And watching people make decisions is what theater's all about.